Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Charlie Martin, the first transgender professional racing driver. She talks about her transformation, her challenges, her amazing story to becoming a top racing driver, and more importantly, a trailblazer for the LGBTQ plus community. Sit tight, buckle up. You won't want to miss this. Hi, Charlie. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Dean. I'm a bit cold, actually. It's quite chilly.
Yes,
at the moment.
snow's on the way,
I thought we were
I
going to have
believe.
some snow today.
Yes, exciting. Get the snowboard out. So I already gave you a short introduction, but you are an all-action girl, Charlie, from surfing, snowboarding, completing the Ninja Warrior course. But you're better known as being the first professional transgender racing driver. Could you give me a kind of whistle-stop tour of your career, please?
Absolutely. So I found my way into racing really. I initially wanted to be a fighter pilot. I was obsessed with the idea of flying as a kid. And I gave up on that dream around the time, maybe when I was 11 years old, around the time that I discovered racing through one of my friend's dads at school. And we'd go away with him at the weekends, we'd be in the paddock and just trying to help out. And I just, I loved being in that environment. I found it really exciting, just the noise and, being so up close to all the action. And I guess, not coming from a motorsport family myself or a really wealthy family who could just afford for me to go go-karting or anything. Yeah. I really cut my teeth on a PlayStation, playing games like Gran Turismo and Colin McRae Rally. And if I'm honest, that's a big part of how I really got the buzz of motorsport. I think those two things, being actually there, but then having this kind of virtual world of like, wow, this is what racing's all about. So I got into racing the year actually that I left university. It was quite late on for a lot of people. Missed out the whole karting bit. Bought a Peugeot 205, which I saved up from a summer job, and spent a year trying to put it all back together. Really just learning on the job, as they say, because I didn't really know quite how to turn it into a race car. But a year later, I had it ready and I started hill climbing it. I had to get a few other people to do things like electrical work or any welding, but things like all the body work, I sprayed it myself, borrowed a spray booth to do that, got someone to show me how to spray. I've always been quite hands-on and quite practical, so and quite resourceful in that sense, I suppose. So it all kind of came together, and I started hill climbing, and I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And I did it on a shoestring. I'd camp in a tent, and it was really pretty humble beginnings. I didn't have any big plan back then of I'm gonna become a professional racing driver or anything like that.
What age was this?
And really, I'd say that would have been something like 2005, 2006, something like that I started. And then that sort of, I guess about 5 years in, that's when I reached a point in my life I had to transition, which is a whole other thread, of course, to the story. But that kind of took me in a whole new direction, I suppose, subsequently, because I gave up for a year, then I came back, and things really started to change for me in my life. And that, ended up me going and racing in France for 3 years, which really helped me kind of broaden my horizons and start trying to vlog about what I was doing, start trying to build a bit of a profile up. And gradually that brought me to a point where I was like, oh, actually, maybe I can get sponsorship and maybe I can turn this into something much bigger. And that was really, I guess, the beginning of me thinking, yeah, perhaps I could be a professional racing driver.
So when did you first become a professional racing driver? When was that? Because obviously most people start in karting, don't they? And because you didn't have that grounding, it must have been really tough for you to sort of accelerate your career.
Absolutely. I mean, I really discounted myself for a long time because I just assumed that all professional racing drivers do go-karting and go through that whole pathway. And if you haven't done that, then, it's like turning up at, I don't know, trying to be a doctor and not going to medical school. I just assumed, well, that's why you can't do that. So I guess in terms of, I suppose like around 2018, that's when I started trying to think, how can I really turn this into a career? It's kind of interesting because I suppose there's lots of ways you can be a racing driver. The number one, of course, is that you race for a manufacturer like BMW or Ferrari or someone like that, where you're actually a salary driver. But of course, then there are a lot of people that fall outside of that, where there's all kinds of ways of trying to make it work. And I think that's one of the hardest things, really, is thinking, well, I need to raise money to go racing with, but I also need to pay my mortgage and pay my bills. And how is this all going to work? And that's again, looking into motorsport from the outside, it's quite a strange sport, I think, trying to understand how you get to that point. So I guess, from kind of 2018, 2019, that's when I was like, right, this is it. I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket and quit my day job and try and just, do what I want to do, really.
I know that motorsport is one of the few sports where there's no gender division. Being the first professional transgendered racing driver, how was that received in the paddock? I don't know if they call it the paddock. How is that received within the motor racing community amongst your kind of peers and everyone else beyond that?
Yeah, I think there's a few levels to this, because on the one hand, there was me transitioning when I was competing at club level and going back into the paddock for the first time as my true self, and the 2 years really of me transitioning within that space. And then there's also then me coming out in 2018, which would have been 6 years down the line in a kind of more of a like professional motorsport context. So the first one was really hard, if I'm honest, because there was just no LGBTQ plus visibility in that space.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I was walking into, how people were going to treat me. And I think especially being trans, there was a long time where I felt very, very vulnerable, very kind of conspicuous as a trans person in that space. And I think a lot of people, it's fair to say, just didn't really know how to react to me. There was a lot of awkwardness and trying to basically just have any kind of dialogue with people so I could try and educate people and get them to understand perhaps what was happening in my life. And that process took a long time. I had to be very patient. I don't think it's like people were unkind as such. I think it's just that none of the people in that space had ever met anyone from the trans community. So there was probably just a lot of social awkwardness around, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, I don't know what pronoun to use, all those kinds of things. And so I had to gradually educate everybody within that space to turn it into, an inclusive environment. But that's not an overnight process.
No.
By the time I kind of, by the second year, I think people got used to me, and I guess, I felt more confident in myself, and, just started to feel like it had felt before, when it was, it was my happy place and somewhere that I never questioned my right to fit in or feel valid. And then, the other part of that is then transitioning. I went off to race in France for 3 years. I came back 2018. That was when I was like, right, I'm going to try and launch myself into a professional career. And I had this real dilemma because on the one hand, I knew I'd been able to see how I'd made such a big impact in the space that I was in within my own kind of little microsphere. And I was vlogging about my transition and all these things. And I thought, well, wow, there's a really big opportunity to actually do some good here, because I'm going to try and build a profile as a driver. I need to do that to get support and backing and everything. So what if I just scale this whole thing up and I use that to try and do some good and try and make a difference? So I knew this is what I wanted to do, but it was a really, really scary process because there was no one like me in professional motorsport. So I knew how difficult it had been to get the sponsorship that I'd managed to find. And I thought, well, at what point do you draw a line between authenticity and your integrity and just not having a career? Because if you're going to make yourself different to 99.9% of drivers and you can't get any sponsorship and then you can't go racing, then it was a really difficult decision. And it made me feel bad to have to weigh that up. And thankfully, I thought, I'm just going to come out. I'm going to do it. Transgender visibility, 31st of March, 2018. And we wrote my story with, someone that my PR connected me with, and we tried to, basically just, I guess, present my story in a way that I would present it if I was talking to somebody. In that being trans is not the single thing that defines me. There's lots of other things that I've done to that point, like Ninja Warrior and all these things. And long story short, it was pretty well received. Of course, there was some negativity and trolling and, that normal kind of thing you might expect on social media. But I think from that point onwards, I've had some pretty good support from the media within the motorsport industry and the wider media as well. And it's something that I've never really looked back on. Yeah, I'm really, if I think what could have been if I just tried to hide my identity and keep it a secret. It could have been a very different outcome. I don't know.
For anyone else that finds Charlie inspiring and the journey, she's got a really fantastic YouTube channel, which I think I've watched every single video on there, Charlie, to be honest. And it includes the transformation, the transition videos on there, which is really interesting. And being a trailblazer and a pioneer, you do have to suffer some pain, don't you? But you do almost make a path for people to follow. I thought one thing that was interesting was your trophy cabinet. And you've got like a shelf with the lower shelf is where you were racing as a man. And then the other shelf was a lot bigger with a lot bigger trophies and a lot more trophies. I thought that was quite poignant. Is that something that's a kind of a visual representation of what you've achieved?
I think it's exactly that, really. I mean, that's been one of the most profound experiences, I think, for me going through transition, is understanding how it's enabled me to unlock my potential, to be so much more as a person in terms of what I'm capable of doing than the person that I used to be. And that's, what you just described in terms of trophies and results. I mean, that's like the physical manifestation, the physical representation of that kind of philosophy, really. Because, prior to transition, my results were fairly unremarkable. I think I'd had some trophies. I'd had a few podiums and things throughout the years. But then in the time since then, and certainly during the period that I went off to race in France, I went from being a pretty average driver to suddenly being right at the sharp end of the class, which is where everyone wants to be. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of parts to that kind of puzzle that have come together, really. I think one part of it is not living in denial. The best way I can try and explain that to someone is that when you're not living as your true self, you're really compartmentalizing massive parts of who you are, of your personality, and so on. And actually, that requires physical energy to do that. You might not realize, because you've been doing it for so many years, it feels as natural as breathing. But the reality is that actually that is very fatiguing. And it's like trying to do something on your computer when you're running a program in the background and everything slows down. And when I actually started transition and I just stopped trying to be someone that I wasn't, I remember just having this period over like a short period of time where I just suddenly felt like I had so much space to think and focus. It was like someone flicking a switch in my head. And really that's just sort of proliferated into all these elements of my life, really. Just being able to stop doubting, stop questioning yourself, and actually just trust your gut, trust your intuition, and just do what feels right for you. And it sounds really simple, but when you've done the complete opposite on some level for so long, to actually do that, and then to see how it's enabled me to move forwards and do things in my life that I never thought were possible. A big part of it, I think, is transition was something that I always wanted. But at the same time, I felt like I'm never going to be able to do this. And I turned it into this mountain that I thought I'm never going to climb that. And I think it's true that we all have things. Everybody has their own little personal Everest, the things that we want, that we may be scared of tackling for whatever reason, whether it's fear of failure, whether it's fear of rejection, whatever it is. But imagine doing that thing, tackling it head on, and then it doesn't just kind of go okay. Like you really feel like you've owned it, like you've knocked it out the park. And it reframed my perspective on what's possible in life, because I felt like, well, hang on, I've done the scariest thing I can ever imagine. I'm not actually afraid of, what am I afraid of?
Yeah.
Not really afraid of anything. And so you suddenly start pushing yourself to do more things. It challenges your perception of what's possible, really. And it, for me, it's really, it's just really changed my whole way of living, I think.
Can we just talk about the transition? So I think at the age of 30, you began your transition, didn't you? Is that right? And then, but you knew that you were in the body, in the wrong body from a very young age. Did that put you in a dark place in terms of your emotions and your mental state during the period up to 30?
Yeah, it did. I mean, as a kid, I was outwardly, I was a very happy, smiley, kind of jokey kind of kid. I've always been someone with a very sunny disposition, which has probably helped me in many ways, really, to deal with what was going on in the background. At times, I think at times I found it easier, and at times I found it harder. And I think the things that probably made it harder was whenever I probably had a window into what my life might be like. When I kind of preoccupied myself with other things, it wasn't so bad. But I think when you're reminded of the fact that you're living a life that doesn't actually feel like you, and those were the times that I found really, really difficult, and absolutely, had periods of depression and anxiety, and I don't know what really. I never went to a doctor about any of these things, but throughout my childhood and adolescence, I certainly had dark periods in my life when I was trying to deal with things or not dealing with things. That was the whole point, just burying your emotions very deep inside you. And really it was those emotions getting to a point where I actually hit rock bottom, and I fell to the lowest point I've ever known in my life. And And at that moment, I knew, well, I was having a nervous breakdown, and I was actually thinking about taking my own life. And at that point, you think, well, okay, I've got two options here, and basically, I thought, well, if I'm going to carry on living, there's only one way that that's going to happen, because I keep going around in this same loop. I remember the chap that was counselling me for a few years said, if you choose the path to transition, or rather, everybody comes to this crossroads, and if you keep choosing the path not to transition, it just brings you around to the same point again and again and again. And I remember his words running through my head, and I was like, well, this is it. This is, if you're going to do this, you've got to do it now. And that was January 2012, and the best decision I've ever made in my life, really. Yeah.
Congratulations. That was those words. Thanks. Obviously going to be imprinted on you for the rest of your life, aren't they? Can we talk about motor racing? So you've driven many different cars, and at the end of this month, on 27th and 28th of March, you're going to be opening up the Electric Revolution Skills Hub conference, first annual conference. The whole conference is about electrification and how it's changing, but just in terms of racing, you've raced Formula E, haven't you, in the esports series during the lockdown? How did you find racing Formula E compared to the combustion engine cars?
It's really interesting. I mean,
it's noisy.
I mean, I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When you're actually in a Formula E car, there's quite a lot of noise, and you hear all these other things as well that you perhaps wouldn't be aware of in a combustion engine car, because you've got all the wind noise, and you hear the suspension rattling and bumping, and all the kind of noises coming from the chassis that normally are just lost over the sound of the engine. So it is quite a visceral experience, just as you would find in a conventional race car, but it's everything's kind of different. And not having any gears it's weird at first, but then actually you quite quickly dial into it, and it's quite nice in a way, because you realise it's one less thing that you're thinking about. Sometimes, for example, especially on the courses that Formula E races on, which are all street courses, there's a lot of corners where you typically be first, second, third gear in a conventionally geared car, and you're not having to think about that. Sometimes you get caught in, should I be in like first gear? But if I'm in first gear, it's too lively, so you short shift, and you maybe have points on the track where you're having to compromise, and nothing quite feels like the right solution. And in a Formula E car, you don't have that problem, because you just have this huge linear acceleration. You just got so much torque, which is available on tap from any point, no matter what speed you're doing, really. The other thing, so Formula E, they just have one control tyre, which is like a kind of treaded tyre that is designed to work in all conditions. But at least racing it on the sim, the Formula E car is very difficult to handle in the wet, and I think we've seen that in real life as well. Again, because of the torque that's available, the car doesn't, or the tyre rather, doesn't really respond so well in the wet. So I think we had one wet race, and it was carnage. but yeah, I loved racing in the Formula E Race at Home Challenge, as it was called. It was a great opportunity. And I think one of the really cool things actually was that, and this is something that people didn't get to see, but they set up all these practice lobbies for everyone. So there were basically two grids. There was the real grid of actual competing Formula E drivers, and then there was everyone in the Formula E Race at Home Challenge, which was the professional sim racers and people like myself. And when we were all competing, or rather when we were all practicing, we were all in this lobby together. So you'd be driving on the track, and you're like Seb Buemi and Pascal Wehrlein and Sam Bird and all these like guys who are often like factory drivers as well for big teams. some of the most well-known racing drivers at the top of their game in the world. So to be sharing track space together was really, really exciting. I remember Seb Bramy hit me so hard at one point. Yeah, it was great. And I mean, I've worked with Formula E quite a bit since, really, in terms of, more in terms of like an EDI role, really supporting some of their initiatives. I've been and done talks with them and panels, and I think it's, they're, aside from the racing, I think they're just a fantastic organisation, because they've started something with a clean sheet of paper, and that's enabled them to touch into all these areas that I think traditional motorsport, for whatever reason, perhaps feels like, we've always done it like this, so this is how we do things. Whereas Formula E is like embracing all these other kind of touch points around sustainability and inclusion and diversity. And I think, they're doing fantastic things as a championship, really.
Do you think that traditional fuel-based motor racing will ever die out? As the roads become more and more full of electric vehicles, replacing, the fuel vehicles. Do you think that motor racing is going to have an impact, and formulas like Formula E will kind of eventually take over things like Formula One?
It's hard to say, really. I think we've certainly seen electric racing making a mark in motorsport, when you look at like the whole spread of everything, rallycross, of course Formula E, and also Extreme E. You've got, I'm just trying to remember what it's called now as well. There's another single-seater kind of spin-off series, which is a much lower price point than competing in Formula E. So I think we will see more electric, like single make series popping up. I think Porsche has announced one as well. Whether it's ever going to like completely replace electric cars, I don't know. It's hard to say. I suppose, because I'm racing in endurance racing. That's an obvious one to kind of focus on for a moment, because the issue with with all electric cars is the range and the batteries. And if you were to do an endurance race for 24 hours, you'd have to be able to either physically change, like swap the batteries out, or you'd have to be able to charge them, which even with the supercharger is probably going to take 10 minutes, I'd have thought, with current technology. So it would change the nature of the racing quite a bit. So I don't know. I mean, when you consider that pretty much all the big manufacturers have said they're going to stop building combustion engines after 2030, I think, is it? But then Porsche is also trying to develop synthetic fuel, which is, I think, produces virtually no emissions. Whether we'll see this kind of electric cars going in one direction and more hybrid cars running on synthetic fuel, which I think is also designed to be able to. It's being designed to be able to be used in, a car that you're driving now, or a car that's 10, 15, 20 years old still. I don't know. It's hard to say with motorsport. Part of me is a bit purist and thinks electric racing absolutely has its place, but I think the idea of losing all combustion engines in motorsport, it would be a shame. But then how that looks in the future, when you consider that, okay, say a manufacturer like BMW says, BMWs are raced in various series around the world, from touring cars to endurance racing and so on. Right, we're not going to build any more petrol cars. Well, then how does that translate into building race cars? Because they're going to be based off a production car. I don't know. It's really it's not completely clear at the moment, I think, for anyone to guess how that's going to look.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned BMW there, Charlie. You're a friend of the brand at BMW, aren't you? What does that role? What shape does the role take in terms of going forward? Are you like an ambassador for driving, or are you doing some EDI projects with them, or is it more to do with your transformation and leading the way there?
Yeah, I guess it's really a combination of those things. I raced a BMW at the Nürburgring for the Nordschleife for the Nürburgring 24-hour race. Well, I did a full season there in 2020, and it was a historical moment because it was the first time any trans driver had ever competed in that race. And the Nürburgring 24-hour race is one of the most legendary endurance races out there. So it was a pretty big deal. And I guess really started, my relationship with BMW started around that time. They did a fantastic story around that, which was, it was kind of surreal for me because it was on BMW.com's homepage. To click on there and see the first thing was this story about my journey and everything and the race. We finished fourth as well, so we were only one step off the podium, which was cool. It meant a lot to me, and really the relationship kind of grew out of that event. And so I've been working with them, as you say, on EDI projects. I've done a lot of talks and internal training workshops. I've driven a lot of their cars, as you might imagine, working with them at events, track days, doing hot passenger laps for guests, both in electric cars and in petrol cars, which has been really interesting actually to give people the comparison of those two experiences. So driving the i4 M50, which is their first ever fully electric M car. So there's that. I've periodically done some racing in BMWs since then, and then also just getting to drive their cars and talk about that and share those experiences across social media with people. I'm currently driving the brand new BMW M3 touring competition, which is the first time BMW have ever done a touring in the M3. And it's such a cool car. I think they're taking it back this week, sadly.
So I understand you were looking, one of your targets has been the 24-hour race at Le Mans. How far are you away from that? Is that still a target of yours? And what just generally are you looking forward to in the next few years in and around motorsport, I suppose?
Yeah, racing at Le Mans has been, I guess, a dream of mine for ever since I first went there in 2001 as a spectator. I went there for 3 years running with my oldest brother, who's also a petrol head. And back then, to give you an idea, that was before I transitioned. That was before I started racing. It just left a massive impression on me. If you've never been, you imagine something like Glastonbury, but for racing, for motorsport, for petrol heads, because it's something like 250, 300,000 people. It's just mind-blowing, really, when you see the race unfolding in front of you. So ever since I started racing professionally, I felt like, this is something that I want to try and do it. Certainly as a driver, it feels like the biggest thing that I could ever achieve. And I think to make history as the first trans driver ever to line up on the grid would be a really inspiring story, I think, for people in the community, to see someone from the community doing something that really could give hope to people, and really, most importantly, something that can help create more awareness and acceptance and inspire more positive change, because there's so much negativity right now in terms of how the trans community is seen and treated. So in terms of how it's going, I'm doing very well, I'd say, in terms of my career, the trajectory that I'm on. 2021, we finished third in Brit Car, racing the Praga. Last year, I was racing in America for the first time. My teammate and I finished second in the North American Lamborghini Cup. So as a driver, I think part of it is being, you're judged on your results, your performance, and what you're doing. that side of it's going really, really well. And another side of it is getting the backing to make it possible, either from sponsorship or partnerships, or or people who privately support you as individuals, who just believe in what you're trying to do. And I'll be honest, that's the hardest bit for me. It's if somebody gave me the money tomorrow, then you can go and line up a season, and it's possible. But it's to race at that level is very expensive, and so yeah, I'm just continually doing what I'm doing. My teammate I'm racing with at the moment is he's Canadian. He's based over in the States, Jason Keats, and he and I both share the same ambition of racing at Le Mans. So it's something that we're kind of working on together as well, and it's nice to feel like it's something that's happening. We've both got our kind of ideas of how that might look. So I can't unfortunately say it's going to happen this year, but certainly it feels like things are moving in the right direction.
Charlie, it will be yet another inspirational video in amongst hundreds of other inspirational videos that I've viewed on your channels. So it's probably a good point to sort of promote your channel. So we've got gocharlie.co.uk. There's an amazing website. There's lots of media stuff on there. Charlie's appeared on Sky News, BBC, you name it. She's appeared on it and been interviewed by lots of people better than myself. And what other, you've got your YouTube channel is at Go Charlie. And is there anything else you want to shout out in terms of your socials or?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you search Go Charlie, my Twitter and Instagram and Twitch handles are at Go Charlie M. Unfortunately, someone got at Go Charlie; they beat me to it. But if you search Go Charlie, you'll most likely find my Instagram or my website, as Dean said, and from there you'll be able to find all the other links to things that I'm doing, find out what I'm up to, and maybe have a look back at my back catalogue of the videos that you mentioned. So yeah, I mean, all my videos from transition that I made quite a long time ago, I think. If you look at some of them, they're really, the early ones are really quite rusty in terms of my blogging style.
I really enjoyed all of them. They're really good.
But they're all still up because some of those videos have got 500,000 views, and I've met a lot of people over the years, or people have emailed me and said, the videos, this video specifically or whatever, has helped somebody to start their own transition. And to me, that's really what it's about, is trying to help other people find, I guess, what I've been very lucky to find in my own life, just to find inner peace and self-acceptance, and to feel comfortable in my own skin, and everything then that's enabled me to go out and do. So I just think, why wouldn't you want anyone else to find that, really? And I guess that's on a simple level, that's the kind of message that I like to try and put out, really. When you look at a lot of the negativity that centers around the trans community right now in the UK and the US especially, I just don't understand why people don't, why people have such a fear of transphobia, which is quite literally an irrational fear. That's what a phobia is. Just trying to do my bit, really, to inspire positive change in the world.
Final question. What do you do for downtime? Do you get downtime? I saw on your Twitter handle that you were never at home. I think your location said never at home. So is that because you're busy with the racing career, or being a friend of the brand for BMW, or do you actually get downtime now? Do you still go surfing and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I try to get a balance in my life. Last year was a challenge because racing in America, it was 9 trips backwards and forwards throughout the season. But yeah, surfing is something that I love to do. I maybe get to do it a handful of times, really, throughout the year, going on surf trips. Snowboarding as well, but again, that's probably a one-off. I've not been for quite some time pre-lockdown. But I do a lot of like outdoorsy stuff. I I enjoy keeping fit, and I do a lot of trail running. I do a bit of boxing training. I do I'd say I'm probably training 5 days a week, really, sometimes more. My girlfriend's a personal trainer as well, so we naturally, we're very sporty together. We're quite outdoorsy. And so, I mean, I like being busy, which is kind of a good thing, really. So, yeah, there's always something fun going on.
Charlie, it's been an absolute pleasure. You're a true inspiration, not only for people that are thinking about the transgender journey, but for people like me as well. You've got so much passion and desire to come from rock bottom at some points of your life, be safe to say, to actually achieving amazing things. And it's so nice to see you so happy. And I really enjoy your content. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for spending time with me. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks ever so much, Dean. It's been great to chat with you.